I'm live here on Capitol Hill with two senators here. We have Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand here from New York. A big welcome to you both here. A very big day here, an important piece of legislation here. So talk about the RFIA and some of the changes that you made.
We first introduced the bill last year and then began to educate our colleagues about our approach, which is to have a bill that would create a regulatory framework that's very similar to other assets, but that would do so in a way that would foster innovation. Then we had FTX and other business failures surrounding digital assets that really set people back, and they were concerned about moving forward without assurance that we had double down on consumer protection. So that's what this bill does. The consumer protection provision is twice as long as it was under the original bill. We're reintroducing it today, and we'll once again have the opportunity to create a regulatory framework that will protect consumers, but also allow for innovation in this space.
And Senator Gillibrand, I know that there was this concern over how these things are defined as digital assets versus securities. And it does seem from the wording in the bill here that it mostly comes under the purview of the CFTC as assets. Why that decision?
That's not what the bill says, actually, and I think it's a misinformation created by people who want the bill to fail. In fact, what the bill does is looks at digital assets and defines them by their characteristics. So a digital asset that has the characteristics of a security, as defined by the Howey test, which is the legal standard, if it meets the Howey test, then it's a digital security. If it does not, and it is fully decentralized and has the hallmarks of a commodity, then it's a digital commodity. And so we're very clear that assets that are being offered to raise money, like a stock is for a centralized company, that's going to be a digital security because it qualifies and satisfies the Howey test. There's over 15,000 cryptocurrencies right now. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are going to be considered to be digital securities. So the workload by the SEC and CFTC will both be enormous. The one digital asset that has largely been considered to be a commodity by almost all experts is Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin regulatory framework will be under the CFTC because it is defined as a digital commodity. Other than that, there's no clarity about which others will satisfy. They'll have to go through the focus of the legislation that allows for any digital asset to be considered based on its hallmarks, based on its characteristics, so that it will have the appropriate regulator. We've also created a authority that is staffed by people from both the CFTC, the SEC, from the OCC, from Treasury, that will look at these newer types of digital assets that don't clearly fall under a digital commodity or a digital security, and will make recommendations of those. So we've really thought through a lot of the challenges of the industry overall. And this is a year later. So we've seen the rise and fall, we've seen different collapses, and as Cynthia Lummis said, we've really focused on consumer protection. Not only did our consumer protection provisions double in size, we now have pages of Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering provisions that's based on some good bipartisan work by other senators. And so we're collaborating with many people within the Senate who are focused on this issue. We've also taken the time to collaborate with the SEC. We've met with their staff, we've taken their comments, we've made changes to the bill based on their feedback, as well as the staff at the CFTC. So we feel very positive about the direction this bill has gone in, and we think it really addresses and meets the need of today and meets the moment of today.
And do we think it's going to pass as is, or how much bipartisan support do you have for this at the moment?
We've been meeting with members of both parties for months, and now that we have the final language for people to review, we'll be able to add to our bill a number of co-sponsors in both parties.
And as you mentioned there, consumer protection, obviously very important. That's one of the main things that was highlighted by the collapse of FTX. For people who are saying perhaps some protections for some of these exchanges, should there be something more similar as we saw with some of the banking protections? Could we see those sorts of protections for exchanges, and how far will they go?
Many of those banking protections are in the bill. So know your customer, anti-money laundering, those are banking terms of art. And so we've really looked at what are the safety procedures for banks to make sure that they are replicated where appropriate throughout the entire industry.
And for people who are wondering, with the tighter regulations, could we risk seeing innovations in blockchain and crypto go overseas because regulations are too tight? What would you tell them?
Right now, I'm more worried about people going overseas because Europe has a regulatory framework and we don't. We're hearing companies say that they've been impacted by enforcement actions when they've tried to reach out to the regulatory agencies and asking them, what do you want us to comply with so we can avoid getting tripped up by enforcement actions? And these businesses have felt that they haven't gotten adequate guidance from the regulators. So they're looking overseas now because of the regulatory framework in the European Union that is more is farther along, is more mature than what we're doing here. So we need to move forward to protect this industry from leaving the United States.
Without a regulatory framework, there are no consumer protections. There's nothing to protect U.S.-based consumers and U.S.-based businesses. And what I've heard from a lot of the New York businesses is that they have sought regulation, they have sought to register, they want to be broker-dealers, and they've been ignored by our regulatory agencies who, because there's no legislation, don't have the framework from us as to how they should regulate. And that's really created enormous challenges that cannot be overcome. So a lot of those really strong New York businesses and national businesses are going to go abroad because they have consumer protections, they have certainty. And uncertainty is one of the biggest enemies of any business because you cannot innovate, you cannot offer products to customers, you cannot really have a going concern if you don't have rules of the road.
And in cases where a more opaque or very non-transparent company is operating offshore now, we want to include it in our framework, registration with the CFTC. So if a company like Binance, for example, wants to do business with customers in the U.S., they're going to have to register with the SEC and, with the CFTC. And then if they create ancillary organizations, they're going to have to be transparent about that as well.
And in terms of reaction, I know that some of the key stakeholders, you have the SEC, the CFTC. What about within the crypto industry themselves? What role did they play in shaping this legislation?
Well, both Cynthia and I have met with businesses across the country about what's your business model, what are you trying to do, what are you offering to customers, what consumer protections do you have? And so we actually spent a lot of time just learning the industry in all its many, many forms. And this bill largely focuses on cryptocurrencies and blockchain and digital assets that are used in finance specifically. And that's why a lot of the banking regulations apply. It's why this consumer protection aspects are so important. But there's a whole nother world of digital assets and applications for blockchain that this bill doesn't even yet address. So there's a long way to go, but this is the stuff that needs to be done now. There's a sense of urgency because of things like FTX's collapse. FTX was registered in the Bahamas. That was intentional. They didn't even try to register in the United States. And what they did would be illegal under US laws. What we do in this legislation is clarify that it is all illegal under US laws, and this is the way the law is written. So we have looked at all the challenges that we've seen. Another challenge we saw was with the collapse of a stablecoin. And so we have focused on what is a stablecoin. Stablecoins should actually be stable, and they should be 100% fiat backed. So we have strict requirements about who can offer stablecoins and what it looks like in this legislation, which is also something that has a sense of urgency because of that past collapse. It does not allow for algorithmic stablecoins, which we think is a great place to start. And if in the future there's space and room for different types of products, these regulatory agencies can then look at that, review it, and make recommendations. But in the meantime, let's at least create basic rules of the road so that we can have US-based participants and US-based customers that aren't taken advantage of.
And that's certainly all everyone wants, clarity. So hopefully it will get this, and hopefully you'll get the support that you need for this. Thank you so much for joining us, Senators Lummis and Gillibrand. Thank you for joining us here on Yahoo Finance.